Why did no one really know who she was? That was the question that hung in the air at Fort Meridian every time Victoria walked across the sun-baked Arizona base. She moved with an economy of motion that unsettled the others. She didn't drag her boots the way tired recruits did. She didn't strut either. She flowed, like someone who had walked harder ground before and survived. The soldiers whispered. They always whispered. She was 30 years old, though you wouldn't guess it from her quiet posture. Auburn hair pulled back in regulation knots, her face neutral, unreadable, and boots scuffed only from long, careful use. She looked ordinary, forgettable even, and maybe that was the problem. In a place where every soldier fought to stand out, she seemed determined to disappear. But there was something about her silence, something that didn't fit. 5 weeks she had been there, and still, no one knew where she came from. Her transfer paperwork carried signatures most of the base's admin staff had never seen before, stamped with codes that looked less like clerical mistakes and more like warnings. Do not ask questions. Of course, in a place like Fort Meridian, warnings only fueled curiosity. Morning PT only made it worse. Soldiers gasped for air on obstacle courses designed to break them. She didn't. Victoria never panted, never celebrated, never complained. She climbed, crawled, leaped, then walked away as if it had all been nothing more than a warm-up. Her journal, a small leather-bound book she kept in her cargo pocket, came out after each event. She wrote in it quietly, letters so small and precise that no one could make sense of them from a distance. Some said she was documenting weaknesses in others. Others said it was a code. The mystery built with each passing day. And while soldiers are trained to respect competence, they are also trained to smell difference. In her, they smelled both. At night in the barracks, she kept to herself. No gossip, no laughter. Her bunk was regulation perfect, her personal items arranged with surgical precision, and the locked wooden box at the foot of her bed. No one had ever seen her open it. The less she gave, the more they wanted. The more they wanted, the more they resented. But her eyes, those eyes unnerved them most of all. They were the eyes of someone who had lived through storms the others had only been briefed about in sterile classrooms. When instructors described battlefield pressure, she didn't just listen. She nodded, as though she knew what it was like to lose friends one by one and keep fighting anyway. The truth, they were right. She had been there. Operation Midnight Falcon, a mission that officially didn't exist. 12 operatives sent into hostile territory to stop the unthinkable. 11 never came back. Victoria did, but survival had a price, and her silence was the receipt she carried every day. That part no one knew, not yet. At Fort Meridian, all they saw was a woman who didn't play the game, a soldier who refused to bond, who refused to share, who looked like she was moving through their world but never in it. To them, she wasn't one of them. She was a threat to cohesion, and cohesion was everything. The mess hall became the breeding ground. It always starts in the mess hall. Steam lifted from trays of scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard. Hundreds of conversations layered into a constant roar. At a corner table, Victoria sat alone, journal in one hand, fork in the other. Every bite measured, every line written with the same calm discipline. She had picked her seat carefully, back to the wall, full view of every table, every door, every hierarchy in motion. She wasn't just eating. She was observing, cataloging. 3 tables over, Sergeant Melissa Kane held court. She had the kind of charisma that filled space without effort. Soldiers orbited her like planets around a sun. Hair tied back, uniform pressed sharper than regulation required, and a voice that cut through the noise. "There's something off about," Kane said, loud enough for others to hear. 5 weeks here and still nobody knows where she's from. That's not normal, not at this level. Nods, murmurs, agreement feeding agreement. A corporal leaned in, lowering her voice. Admin tried to pull her file. Half of it's redacted. The rest is locked behind clearance levels I've never even heard of. Kane's eyes narrowed, lips curving into a smirk. Exactly. No one just shows up here like that unless they're hiding something. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in advanced training? She doesn't march like us, doesn't talk like us. She's pretending. It wasn't just Kane's voice now. The word spread, carried across tables by soldiers eager to have a target. Some said she was an investigator sent by the Pentagon to catch mistakes. Others whispered she was the daughter of a general, protected by shadowed strings. The truth didn't matter. The not knowing did. At the officers' section, Captain Bradley Foster listened. He was 34, sharp uniform, sharper ambition, and a permanent tension in his jaw that suggested authority was the only language he knew how to speak. Foster had been watching Victoria from day one, and she unsettled him more than he admitted. She made others look slow, weak, and in a system where his reputation was measured by the strength of his unit, her quiet excellence was a problem. When Kane voiced her suspicions, Foster saw opportunity. He strode to her table, his presence shutting conversations down on instinct. "Sergeant Kane," he said, voice pitched to carry across the mess hall, "if you've got concerns about Soldier, you can share them with me directly." Kane straightened, smug now that her frustrations had official ears. "Sir, it's not just me. Multiple soldiers feel the same. She doesn't participate, doesn't engage, performs like the training's beneath her. That's not cohesion, sir. That's arrogance." Foster nodded gravely, as if weighing great matters of command. In truth, he was already calculating. By turning the unit against Victoria, he could make her presence untenable. And in doing so, he would reassert his authority, prove he was the one who kept order, even against mysterious transfers with shadowy signatures. "I'll be conducting a comprehensive evaluation," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Every soldier, every attitude, standards must be met and cohesion will be preserved. No exceptions." Approval rippled through the room. Kane smirked. Soldiers exchanged glances. A target had been marked. But Victoria, still at her corner table, did not react. She didn't look up, didn't speak. Her fork lifted, fell, lifted again. Her pen scratched lines across her journal, as if the conversation 3 tables over was nothing but background noise. But she had heard every word. Her training had taught her to hear everything, to separate voices in a crowd, catalog them, and measure intent. And Foster's intent was clear. He wasn't protecting the unit. He was protecting himself. She closed her journal, slipped it back into her pocket, and rose with the same steady calm that defined her every movement. Walking out of the mess hall, she knew. The balance was shifting. She had played the part of the ghost for 5 weeks. Silent, invisible, harmless. But ghosts can only haunt for so long before someone decides to chase them into the light. And Kane, Foster, and the others were already circling closer. The Arizona sun burned down as she stepped into the yard. Heat waves rippled across the concrete. Soldiers laughed and shouted in the distance. But in her chest, she felt the shift. Soon, someone would push too far. And when they did, Victoria would have to decide whether to stay invisible or remind them all why she had once been chosen for a mission that demanded everything, including her silence. What happens when silence is mistaken for arrogance? That was the question echoing in the weapons maintenance facility that morning. The place smelled of gun oil and solvent, rifles stripped down into their component parts like puzzles waiting to be solved. Metal tables lined the floor, soldiers hunched over them with the restless energy of people who knew their lives depended on the reliability of every bolt and firing pin. Victoria sat in her corner, the same as always, methodical. Her M4 carbine lay in pieces before her. Each motion of her hands was steady, fluid, the rhythm of someone who had done this in foxholes, in mud, in hostile cities where the wrong click could mean the end. She wasn't just maintaining a weapon. She was listening, watching, cataloging. Around her, others sneaked glances. They always did, not because she was fast, though she was, not because she was flawless, though she was, but because she never hesitated. She didn't double-check schematics or curse at jammed bolts. She simply moved. And in the military, sometimes effortless was more unnerving than failure. At the next station, Private Tyler fought his rifle like it was an enemy. The bolt assembly jammed again and again. His movements grew sharper, sweat dripping from his brow even though the air was cool inside the facility. He muttered, cursed under his breath, then louder, "Come on." Victoria saw the problem instantly. A warped internal piece, nothing catastrophic. 30 seconds in the right hands and it would be fixed. But she said nothing. She simply kept working, her hands steady, her eyes down. Glanced sideways, saw her calm precision, and something inside him snapped. "You know," he said, his voice pitched high enough to draw ears from nearby stations, "most soldiers would offer to help when they see someone struggling. That's what a team does." Her hands didn't pause. Her face didn't change. She continued to work as if his words were nothing but background noise. The silence stung worse than a retort. Other soldiers looked up, curious, eager. Corporal Phillips, broad-shouldered, tattoos running down his forearms, seized the moment. "That's what I've been saying," he called. "No team spirit, zero interest in helping anyone. Just sits there acting like she's better than the rest of us." It spread like fire across dry grass. Heads turned, voices muttered, suspicion found fuel. And then, the voice they had all been waiting for. Sergeant Melissa Kane emerged from the supervisor's office, timing perfect, her presence deliberate. She didn't raise her voice much, she didn't have to. The room already wanted her to speak. "This is exactly what I told Captain Foster," she said. "We're supposed to be building cohesion here, shared challenges, mutual support. And yet," her eyes cut to Victoria, "some people think service is a solo career." Every gaze landed on Victoria now, waiting, wanting her to explain herself. She looked up, slowly. Her eyes tracked from to Phillips to Kane. The weight of her gaze was not defensive, not angry, only measured. As if she were studying them, filing them away like data points in some equation only she could see. Then, without a word, she set down her cleaning brush, reached for her leather notebook and began to write. The scratch of her pen filled the silence. Tiny, precise letters, lines and corrections. She wrote while they watched, while frustration built into anger. It wasn't disagreement. It wasn't argument. It was dismissal. His voice cracked. "Are you seriously taking notes right now? We're talking about unit dynamics and you're what? Writing a diary." She didn't look up. Her pen moved, calm and steady. Then she closed the book, slipped it back into her pocket, and resumed cleaning her rifle. The message was clear. Their opinions did not matter. The room erupted in a different way now, not with noise but with a sharp, uncomfortable silence. Soldiers can handle confrontation. They can handle defiance. What they cannot handle is being treated as irrelevant. Kane's face flushed. Her words cut sharper now. "This ends today. I'm documenting this behavior and forwarding it through the proper channels. Captain Foster will know exactly how unwilling you are to be part of a team." Phillips chimed in, satisfied. "Someone needs to tell her that military service isn't a one-man show. We succeed or fail together, and anyone who doesn't get that doesn't belong here." The noise of tools scraping on metal slowed. One by one, soldiers stopped working, watching, measuring the ghost in their midst who, without saying a word, had drawn all their attention. But Victoria didn't flinch, didn't defend, didn't even acknowledge. She kept cleaning, as though their anger was nothing more than wind rattling a window pane. Because she had been here before. She had sat across from interrogators trained to break the human mind. She had endured weeks in solitary rooms where silence itself became a weapon. Compared to that, this was background static. No, what concerned her wasn't their anger. It was the way that anger was being written down, carried upward, given weight. Soon, it wouldn't just be whispers and glares. It would be orders, evaluations, command decisions. and that was something even she couldn't ignore. When she finished reassembling her rifle, she ran the post-maintenance inspection with the same precision she always did. Bolt forward, chamber check. Sight alignment, perfect. Not fast, not slow, perfect. And for a moment, she allowed herself the bitter irony. The soldiers mocking her dedication had never been tested in ways that truly mattered. They had never been dropped into a city with nothing but silence for company and 12 lives depending on decisions no one else could see. But she had. She carried those 11 ghosts with her every day. And if silence was the only shield she had left, she would keep it until the very last second. That second was coming faster than she had hoped. The morning briefing room vibrated with a different energy the next day. 200 soldiers filed in, boots echoing against concrete, voices subdued. On the front platform stood Captain Bradley Foster, clipboard in hand, posture razor-sharp. Behind him, a large screen displayed a title slide. Performance assessment, all personnel. The words carried weight. Everyone knew what it meant. Victoria slipped into the back row, her leather journal in her lap, eyes scanning. Kane sat third row, surrounded by allies, her expression smug. She had escalated the whispers, and now Foster had made it official. When he called the room to attention, the sound was absolute. Every soldier on their feet, every soldier listening. "Ladies and," he began, his voice rehearsed, measured. "This facility exists to prepare elite soldiers for the most challenging assignments our nation faces. That preparation requires not only excellence of the individual, but the ability to function as a unit." He paused, letting silence settle. In recent weeks, concerns have been raised about cohesion. Concerns I take very seriously, and today those concerns will be addressed. Victoria's pen moved across the page. Not his words, but the reactions, the nervous shifting, the approving nods, Kane's quick smile, and Foster himself, the careful cadence, the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't speaking from conviction. He was playing a part. The part of a commander proving he had control. "Today's evaluation," Foster continued, "will test not only your tactical competence but your ability to collaborate, to listen, to sacrifice ego for the mission, because a soldier who cannot work with others is no soldier at all." His gaze swept the room and stopped at the back, on her. The air shifted. Every soldier knew who this was about. Behind him the screen flickered. A hostage rescue scenario, urban environment, multiple entry points, civilian complications, timed execution, teams of 4. "You will be assigned randomly," Foster said, "and given 30 minutes to plan. Your performance will be judged not only on tactics, but on your ability to incorporate every team member. Success requires collaboration." A trap plain as daylight. Victoria closed her journal, slipping it into her pocket. She already knew her team before she reached the assignment board. Phillips, Martinez, 3 of the loudest voices against her. Not random, chosen. As she walked toward them, she felt the weight settle across her chest. The silence she had carried was breaking. 5 weeks of shadows, of restraint, of careful neutrality gone. The storm was coming. And she would have to decide, remain invisible or reveal just enough to save them all. How do you hide knowledge that could save lives? That was the question burning in Victoria's mind as she stepped into the planning room with her assigned team. 4 corners of the room, 4 soldiers, and not one of them wanted her there. Corporal Phillips dominated the table instantly. Broad chest, inked arms, voice booming with the confidence of someone used to taking charge. He spread the building schematics across the table like he owned them, stabbing his finger at lines and doors as if the plan were already written. "We go in hard and fast," he declared. 2 breach front entrance, 2 on the perimeter. Aggression, speed, that's how we win this." Private Tyler paced the wall like a caged dog. Young, restless, eager. "Yeah, exactly. No time for hesitation. If we hit them quick, they won't have time to move the hostages. Specialist Jennifer Martinez didn't look convinced. Arms crossed, expression flat, she stayed near the door as if she'd rather not even be in the room. Her voice cut sharp across the table. "You're treating this like it's just a clearing up. We've got hostages inside. Unknown number of hostiles. Unknown layout. You charge the front and you're walking right into a kill zone." Phillips bristled, his jaw tightened. Sometimes simple is best, complicated plans fail. Martinez leaned in, and simple plans kill hostages. The air thickened, tension building like static before a storm. Eyes darted between them, unsure which side to take. Phillips doubled down, raising his voice. Martinez rolled hers sharper. And Victoria sat, silent, her notebook open, pen in hand, her eyes moving from schematic to soldier. She didn't argue, didn't interrupt, she wrote. But inside, her mind was racing. She had seen this before. The overconfident leader, the young soldier desperate to prove himself, the sharp analyst dismissed because she made people uncomfortable. And she had seen what happened when a team chose pride over precision. She had lived the cost. 11 lives, gone in the dust of a city whose name would never appear in records. And here in this small planning room, she could already see the cracks. Phillips' simple plan would collapse in under 3 minutes. She could see the choke points, the blind corners, the inevitable ambush. She could see where would panic, where Martinez's comms would be overwhelmed, where hostages would die in a hail of theoretical bullets. But to say it out loud would be to reveal too much. Because she didn't just know theory, she knew. 7 real hostage rescues, 3 in cities that looked exactly like this, training not in textbooks but in blood, and if she spoke with that kind of certainty, there would be questions. Questions she couldn't answer. Phillips slammed his hand on the table. "All right, enough, we're wasting time. This is my plan, we execute it." And then he turned to her. "And you've been sitting there scribbling notes like a teacher's pet. You got anything useful, or are you just writing down how bad the rest of us are?" The room went still, stopped packing. Martinez's eyes shifted, curious. For weeks she had avoided this. For weeks she had stayed silent, let them think what they wanted. But now the challenge was direct, public. She couldn't dodge it without looking incompetent. She closed the notebook slowly, looked up. "I think your approach has merit," she said evenly, her voice calm. "But it might benefit from considering additional variables." Philip smirked, satisfied at the acknowledgement. "Finally, what variables?" Her finger traced the schematic. "These windows face east. Afternoon sun will blind Overwatch positioned here. The lobby beyond the main door is a natural kill zone. Any hostiles inside will expect a frontal breach. They'll have overlapping fire. Anyone entering there won't make it 10 feet. The room shifted. Her tone was steady, not theoretical, practical. She spoke like someone who had seen it happen. Stepped closer, curiosity breaking through his defensiveness. "Okay, so what would you do instead?" She hesitated. She felt the weight of the decision pressing against her chest. Every detail she gave risked unraveling the cover she had built. But if she stayed vague, Phillips would push harder and the plan would fail. "Multiple entry points," she said finally. "Small teams, simultaneous vectors, divide their focus, force them to split, confuse their defense, use the structure against them instead of fighting it." Martinez's eyebrows rose. She nodded slowly. "That actually makes sense. Create uncertainty, dilute their firepower." His eyes lit up. "Yeah, exactly, that's smart." But Philip stiffened, his authority cracking under her words. He jabbed the schematic with his finger again. "Multiple entries require coordination. Coordination means timing. And timing goes wrong, hostages die. A simple plan is harder to screw up." "Simple plans," Victoria replied quietly, "are easier to predict, easier to counter." The words landed like steel. She hadn't meant them to, but they did. For the first time, Phillips faltered, not because she had argued, but because she had said it with the calm weight of someone who had lived it. The silence stretched, and Martinez stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, and Phillips, his jaw flexed, his authority slipping like sand through his fists. 15 minutes left on the clock, but Victoria knew the real countdown had nothing to do with the timer. She had revealed too much. The desert sun hung low when their team stepped onto the training field. The mock building loomed ahead, concrete and windows rigged with sensors. 300 soldiers gathered behind barriers, watching, waiting. On the raised platform, Captain Foster stood flanked by instructors, his voice booming over the loudspeakers. Team 4, you are cleared to begin. 12 minutes. Hostage rescue scenario. You will be judged on tactics, execution, and collaboration. The word collaboration lingered like a blade aimed at her. Their plan, such as it was, had been a compromise. Phillips insisted on his frontal assault. Martinez forced in elements of Victoria's suggestion. Eager to belong, nodded at everything. The result wasn't strategy. It was a patchwork. Victoria had been placed in Overwatch sniper position, removed from the core, safe, distant, and powerless. Through her scope, she studied the building. Every corner, every shadow. She could see the ambush points already. She knew how the next 10 minutes would unfold. Phillips would breach confidently, and within seconds he'd be pinned. His corridor would be blocked. Martinez's comms would flood, and the hostages lost. Her finger hovered over the trigger guard. The rifle was cold against her cheek. And in her headset, Phillips' voice cracked through. Breach in 3, 2, 1. The explosion of noise echoed across the field. Soldiers cheered from behind the barriers. For 60 seconds it looked flawless. Foster nodded on his platform. Kane smirked from the crowd. But then, exactly as she had predicted, chaos. Phillips pinned in a corridor crossfire, trapped by debris. Martinez shouting into the comms, trying to coordinate two soldiers who couldn't hear. Through her scope, Victoria saw it all. She saw the kill zone ahead of Phillips, the blind corner that would take him down in 30 seconds. She saw the hidden maintenance route had missed, the one path that could salvage the mission. She saw failure, and she had a choice. Stay silent, let them fail, protect her cover. Or speak, and reveal the knowledge that no soldier at her rank should possess. Her breath caught in her chest, her finger tapped the radio key. And in a calm voice, steady as the grave, she said, "All units halt, advance immediately. Phillips, you've got hostiles at 270 and 315. Redirect to Charlie 3 maintenance access. Martinez, shift comms to secondary channel. Do it now." The silence that followed was deafening. Her tone wasn't tentative, wasn't speculative, it was command. Phillips froze, confusion, anger, but also survival instinct. He checked, and found exactly what she had said. Hostiles positioned like hunters in the dark. Redirected, found the maintenance path concealed and perfect, exactly where she had guided him. Martinez's voice crackled back, stunned. "How did you know that?" There was no answer she could give, not without breaking everything. But it was too late. The mask was cracking. On the platform, Foster leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The instructors scribbled furiously on their clipboards. 300 soldiers whispered, their voices carrying like waves. Who was she? What was she? And why had she been hiding? Victoria kept her scope steady, her voice calm, but inside she knew the silence was over. She had just revealed herself. And nothing would ever be the same. What happens when the mask slips? That was the question burning through the training field as the echoes of simulated gunfire faded. Team 4's mission had been salvaged, not by leadership or cohesion, but by a single voice on the radio. A voice calm, certain, and impossibly precise. And everyone knew it. From her overwatch perch, Victoria lowered her rifle and breathed evenly, as if her heart hadn't just detonated the fragile anonymity she'd kept alive for 5 weeks. Soldiers were already whispering in the stands, 300 eyes drawn to her more than to the team she'd saved. Captain Bradley Foster's jaw was locked tight on the raised platform. His clipboard hung forgotten at his side. For 5 weeks, he had treated her as a problem to be solved, a disruption to his carefully maintained authority. But now, before his entire command, she had exposed something worse, competence that he couldn't control. The radio crackled, Foster's voice sharper than steel. Team 4, halt exercise, report to the platform now. The order cut through the desert air like a blade. Victoria secured her gear with the same measured calm as always, but every step she took down from her perch felt heavier than the last. Her teammates gathered, Phillips tight-jawed and shaken, wide-eyed with awe, Martinez guarded, thoughtful. Together, they crossed the field toward the platform where judgment waited. The instructors flanking Foster looked different. Not angry, not confused, but intrigued. Sergeant Major Wells, 30 years in uniform, studied Victoria like she was seeing a ghost she half recognized. Lieutenant Colonel scrolled through digital recordings, pausing, rewinding, nodding patterns. They weren't just reviewing an exercise. They were dissecting her. When the 4 soldiers stopped at attention before the platform, Foster didn't waste time. His voice boomed, sharp, deliberate. Team 4, your exercise demonstrated remarkable tactical adaptation, but the source of that adaptation requires explanation. His eyes cut to her. Soldier, your Overwatch guidance exceeded anything in your file. You provided intelligence about interior hostile positions from an exterior post. Explain. Now. The crowd hushed. Victoria stood at attention, eyes fixed past him. Sir, structural analysis combined with pattern recognition and sensor feedback, probabilistic assessment. The words were clean, neutral, designed to satisfy without revealing. But Sergeant Major Wells stepped forward, her voice calm but heavy with experience. No, soldier, that wasn't probability. That was familiarity. Your guidance showed knowledge of advanced reconnaissance protocols, special operations protocols. Where did you learn that? It wasn't an accusation. It was recognition. Victoria's chest tightened. Wells wasn't guessing. Wells knew the signs. Lieutenant Colonel added his own weight. Your route recommendations identified architectural weaknesses not present on the schematics. Either you've trained extensively in rapid structural assessment, or you had prior familiarity with this facility. Neither appears in your record. Phillips shifted beside her, confusion etched across his face. He had dismissed her for weeks, but what he'd heard in her voice during the mission, and what the instructors were now confirming, was knowledge beyond anything he had learned in years of service. His expression hovered between awe and suspicion. Martinez said nothing, but her eyes held the sharp assessment of someone connecting dots faster than most. Foster, however, was not interested in dots. He was interested in control, and control was slipping. Enough games, he snapped. Soldier, I am ordering you to disclose your training background. Your performance is inconsistent with your record. This inconsistency must be resolved immediately. It was a direct order. Victoria breathed once, steady. She had dreaded this moment since she set foot on the base. Obey and expose truths that could unravel more than her own life. Refuse and face insubordination charges that would open investigations anyway. Her voice, when it came, was even. Sir, my background includes training that requires clearance verification before details can be discussed. I respectfully request proper channels be followed. The words were careful, balanced between obedience and protection, but they only ignited Foster's fury. His face flushed red, his voice rising. Clearance protocols do not excuse you from a direct order. This is my facility, and you will answer me here and now. The crowd shifted uneasily. They knew the line he was crossing. To force a soldier to reveal classified details in front of 300 witnesses wasn't command. It was humiliation. Wells stepped in, her voice carrying calm authority. "Captain, if this soldier is invoking clearance, we need to respect that. We should verify before pressing." Foster cut her off. "Sergeant Major, this soldier has been undermining cohesion since arrival. Redacted files, evasive behavior, unexplained capabilities. This ends here." He turned back to Victoria, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Remove your uniform top, now." The order struck like a thunderclap. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Soldiers shifted in discomfort. Even Phillips, who had been her loudest critic, looked uncertain now. Wells stepped forward again, sharper this time. "Captain, that order is inappropriate and violates." "Stand down, Sergeant Major," Foster barked, his voice cracking with the force of someone who felt his authority slipping beyond repair. "This soldier is hiding something, and we will expose it right here, right now." Victoria's breath slowed. She could refuse and be court-martialed before sundown. She could argue and risk blowing the cover that had kept Operation Midnight Falcon buried, or she could comply and let the tattoo speak for itself. Her hand rose to the zipper of her uniform. Metal teeth separated with a sound impossibly loud in the desert silence. She shrugged off the fabric, revealing the olive tank beneath. And when she turned, the desert sun caught the ink on her back. Gasps cut through the silence. There, between her shoulder blades, etched deep into her skin, was the insignia. A snarling wolf's head, lightning bolts crossing behind it, 7 stars scattered above. The iron. Wells inhaled sharply, froze mid-note. Even Foster's face drained of color as recognition dawned. Because this wasn't just a tattoo. It was a mark of a unit that officially didn't exist. A unit spoken of only in classified corridors, whispered of in contexts where even whispers could end careers. The iron meant one thing. She had belonged to something beyond their reach, something most of them weren't cleared even to know. The crowd erupted in murmurs, soldiers shifting in disbelief. Philip's face was pale, his jaw hung open. Martinez's expression turned calculating. And Foster, the man who had demanded this exposure, suddenly looked like he had stepped onto a. His authority hadn't just been undermined, it had been obliterated. Victoria pulled her uniform top back on, movements calm, precise, as if she hadn't just detonated the base's equilibrium. Wells' voice cut through the chaos, controlled but edged with gravity. "Captain, this soldier's background exceeds your clearance. This matter is no longer under your authority." Foster opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, his face a storm of fury and fear. He had overplayed. He had forced what should never have been forced, and now he stood exposed before his own command. Victoria stood silent, eyes forward, posture perfect. She didn't need to explain. The tattoo had done that for her. The whispers in the crowd grew louder, spreading like wildfire. "Iron, is that real? What does it mean?" And in the middle of it all, she stood alone. No words, no defense, only silence. Because sometimes silence is louder than any explanation. What happens after the silence breaks? That was the question no one at Fort Meridian seemed able to answer in the days that followed. The tattoo had spoken louder than any confession, louder than any file, louder than even Victoria herself. And once it was seen, it could not be unseen. The iron. Soldiers whispered it in corridors, in the Chow Hall, on training fields. Their voices dropped to conspiratorial tones, as though speaking the name too loudly might summon something they weren't ready to face. Some swore it was myth, an urban legend cooked up to scare rookies. Others insisted it was real, an elite covert unit, deployed only when failure wasn't an option, where even survival was considered secondary to completion. But the one thing they all agreed on was simple. No ordinary soldier carried that mark. And suddenly the ghost they had mocked, the loner they had dismissed, was no longer invisible. She was the center of gravity. In the barracks, her presence shifted the air. Conversations paused when she entered. Soldiers who had once sneered now gave her space, careful space, the way you step around even when you're not sure if it's live. Phillips avoided her eyes, looked at her like a kid seeing a war story come to life. Martinez studied her, measuring something that even Victoria couldn't name. And Kane fumed. The sergeant who had once wielded whispers like weapons now found herself disarmed. Her authority, her charisma, her ability to shape opinion, all of it fractured against the reality of that tattoo. She still spoke, still tried to command circles in the chow hall, but her words carried less weight. Soldiers glanced past her, wondering what Victoria thought, what Victoria knew. The base had shifted. And Foster was unraveling. He kept his posture sharp, his voice commanding, but beneath it all was a man haunted. He had forced the reveal, and in doing so had branded himself the fool who didn't know what he was dealing with. He stormed through offices, demanded meetings with higher command, tried to reassert control through stricter drills, harsher punishments. But control built on fear cracks faster than glass. Every time his voice rose, soldiers remembered how quiet hers had been. Every time he barked orders, they remembered how calmly she had spoken into the radio. And every time he tried to remind them who was in charge, they remembered the insignia burned into her skin, a reminder that authority wasn't always worn on a rank patch. Victoria herself felt the shift, but she carried it differently. She had not wanted this. She had lived her life inside silence for a reason. Operation Midnight Falcon wasn't just a mission. It was a graveyard. 11 names carved into her memory, 11 ghosts that walked with her in every quiet moment. The tattoo on her back was less a mark of pride than a brand of survival, and survival, in her mind, had never been the same as victory. At night in her bunk she wrote, her journal filled with lines small and sharp, each word a fragment of memory. She wrote names, details, a laugh remembered, a promise broken, a final scream caught in static over comms. She wrote because if she didn't, the silence inside her would rot. But some nights, even writing wasn't enough. Some nights she woke in a cold sweat, heart hammering, breath caught as if dust and fire still filled her lungs. Some nights she heard their voices, 11 of them, asking why she lived when they didn't. And on those nights, she would sit at the edge of her bunk, eyes fixed on the dark, waiting for morning to burn the memories away. It was one of those nights when Martinez found her. The barracks were quiet, most soldiers asleep. Martinez approached slowly, a canteen in her hand, her voice low. Couldn't sleep either. Victoria didn't turn, didn't answer. Martinez sat across from her, leaning against the bunk post, silence stretched, not hostile, not heavy, just present. Finally, Martinez spoke again. I don't know what that tattoo really means, but I know the look in your eyes. I've seen it before, in people who came back from places they weren't supposed to survive. Victoria's throat tightened. She forced her voice steady. Then you know not to ask. Martinez nodded. Fair, but you should know something. Phillips thinks you made him look weak. Kane thinks you stole her influence. Foster thinks you've humiliated him. None of them are going to let this go. Victoria met her eyes then, dark, searching. And you, what do you think? Martinez held her gaze. I think you saved us in that exercise, and I think you've been carrying more than anyone here understands. But carrying weight alone, she hesitated, then finished softly. It breaks people, eventually. Victoria didn't reply. She didn't need to. Martinez's words were true, but truth didn't change necessity. The silence between them lingered until Martinez stood, leaving her to the dark. The next morning, the whispers had sharpened into something new. Not just curiosity, not just fear, but questions. Soldiers wanted to know more. They wanted stories, truths, confirmation. And when answers didn't come, they turned to speculation. Some said she had been part of an assassination team. Others claimed she had single-handedly rescued diplomats from a burning embassy. A few insisted she had killed more enemies than entire platoons. The more she stayed silent, the bigger the stories grew. And silence, once her shield, was now becoming something else, fuel for a fire she could not control. Foster, sensing the ground shifting beneath him, tried to seize control of the narrative. In morning briefings, he praised standard military discipline and reminded soldiers that hero myths undermined real cohesion. He spoke of equal accountability and no exceptions. But his words fell flat, because when soldiers thought of discipline, they thought of her. When they thought of accountability, they thought of the tattoo. And when they thought of exceptions, they thought of the silence that had hidden her for so long. Wells and the senior officers who had recognized the insignia held private conversations behind closed doors, meetings that stretched long into the evening, meetings Foster wasn't invited to. And every time those doors closed, his rage grew hotter. He had exposed her, yes, but in doing so, he had unleashed something he couldn't cage. Victoria, meanwhile, carried on as before, quiet, steady, focused. She drilled with precision, wrote in her journal, cleaned her rifle. She spoke little, offered less, and gave them no fuel beyond what they had already seen. But inside, she felt the storm building, because she knew what happened when secrets broke free. They didn't settle, they didn't fade, they escalated. And soon, this base would learn what she had always known: silence protects until it doesn't. That night, as the desert cooled and the stars stretched endless across the black sky, Victoria stood alone outside the barracks. The air was dry, sharp, filled with the faint smell of oil and dust. She closed her eyes and let the silence press in. For a moment, it felt almost like peace. But then a voice behind her. "Foster, you think that tattoo makes you untouchable?" She didn't turn, didn't move. He stepped closer, his words low, venomous. "I don't care what ghosts you carry or what clearance stamped your file. This is my command, and I will break you before I let you take that from me." Her eyes opened, calm, steady. She still didn't turn. Because she didn't need to. He was already breaking himself. How far will a man go to protect his pride? That was the question lingering in the mess hall the morning Foster stormed through, his boots striking like gunfire on tile. Soldiers fell silent as he passed, trays paused halfway to mouths, conversations clipped mid-laugh. His anger was no longer hidden, no longer confined to offices or whispered threats. It had become something visible, something contagious. He scanned the room, eyes cutting for her. And when he found her, sitting alone at the end of a long table, notebook open beside a barely touched tray, his lip curled. For weeks, Victoria had been a shadow in the corner, easy to ignore. Now she was the weight pulling his authority apart. The tattoo, the whispers, the way soldiers glanced at her before following his orders. Every day he could feel it slipping. Control, respect, the delicate scaffolding of command. And he couldn't stop it. But Kane could feed it. She slid into step beside him as he passed, her voice pitched low but sharp. "She's not just undermining you, she's undermining all of us. You saw the looks, they listened to her more than to their sergeants. If we don't cut this out now, you'll lose the unit." It was poison spoken sweetly, and Foster drank it without hesitation. That afternoon the drills changed. Harder, longer, punishing. Foster's voice thundered over the field as soldiers ran until legs shook, pushed through obstacle courses until hands bled, carried gear until shoulders buckled. And every time someone faltered, his eyes cut to Victoria, as if daring her to break, as if punishing the entire unit was just a prelude to seeing her bend. But she didn't. She moved steady, silent, every push-up precise, every climb efficient, every carry controlled. Sweat poured, muscles strained, but she never wavered. And that unbroken steadiness made the others falter more. Some began to resent her again, muttering that she was the reason for the punishments. Others looked at her with quiet awe, pushing harder to keep pace with someone who seemed carved from steel. Either way, Foster's plan backfired. He hadn't broken her. He had sharpened her image. Kane saw it too, and where Foster raged, Kane calculated. Late one evening, she found Phillips outside the barracks, smoking, his face drawn with fatigue. "You know why he's pushing us like this?" she asked, flicking her lighter, eyes narrowing through the flame. "Because of her, because she thinks she's above all of us. She makes him look weak and we pay the price." Phillips exhaled smoke, jaw tight. He had felt the humiliation in that training room, felt how easily she had cut down his plan. He didn't need much convincing. Kane leaned closer. "You want your authority back, help me strip hers." It was the same poison, but with a different audience. And slowly, piece by piece, she was building a coalition. Soldiers worn thin by Foster's punishments, bruised egos, simmering resentment, all of it pointed toward one target. Victoria. But Victoria knew. Not from whispers or looks, though those were loud enough. She knew because she had lived it before. In cities where suspicion could turn neighbors into informants, in squads where envy could be deadlier than bullets. She saw the signs, conversations that halted when she entered, glances exchanged when Foster's orders grew harsher, Kane's shadow stretching longer across the unit. And she felt the pressure building. Every night her journal filled with sharper lines, not just names of the dead but warnings, patterns, the storm tightening. Martinez noticed. She cornered Victoria outside the armory one evening, her voice firm. "They're circling you. You feel it too, don't you?" Victoria didn't answer. She didn't need to. Martinez pressed harder. "You think silence protects you. Maybe it did once. But here, against them, silence is giving them the rope to hang you with." Victoria's voice was quiet, steady, and speaking gives them the knife to cut deeper. Martinez stared at her, frustrated but beneath it respect. "You can't carry this forever. One day it'll carry you." Victoria met her eyes, then walked past without another word. Because Martinez was right. And that truth scared her more than Foster, more than Kane, more than the whispers growing sharper each day. The breaking point came 3 nights later. Lights out had passed, but the barracks were restless. Soldiers shifted in bunks, whispers carried across the dark. Foster's punishments had stretched everyone thin, and Kane's words had poisoned the gaps between them. Victoria lay still, eyes open to the ceiling, her journal closed at her side. She felt it before it happened, the shift in the air, the collective breath held by 30 men and women waiting for something they didn't quite want to witness but couldn't stop. The sound came first, boots on concrete, heavy, deliberate. "Phillips." He stopped at her bunk, shadow towering, voice low and sharp. "You think that tattoo makes you untouchable, makes you better than the rest of us." Silence. He grabbed the edge of her blanket, yanking it back. "Say something." She didn't move, didn't flinch. Kane's voice came from the dark, a hissed encouragement. "She won't. She hides behind it, strip her silence like she stripped our pride." And suddenly hands were there, Phillips, hesitating but drawn by the pressure, 2 others pulled in by Kane's whispers. They didn't strike. They didn't shout. They pulled. Fabric tearing, uniform jackets stripped from her shoulders. Gasps cut the dark, not from her but from the witnesses. Because there it was again. The wolf's head, the lightning bolts, the 7 stars. Ink black against pale skin, illuminated in the dim glow of emergency lights. And the silence that followed was heavier than any blow. Phillips froze, hands trembling, stumbled back, eyes wide. Even Kane faltered, her script collapsing under the weight of the mark she had thought would shame, not silence. The tattoo wasn't weakness. It was history. It was survival. It was everything they couldn't understand. Victoria sat up slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. Not angry, not afraid, just steady. And in that moment, the power shifted again. The ones who had tried to strip her had revealed themselves instead. Because nothing exposes a person faster than the silence they cannot break. The next morning the barracks hummed with tension. Word of the night had spread, not as whispers this time, but as a story, a warning. Kane's influence cracked. Phillips kept his distance, couldn't meet her eyes. And Foster doubled down. He called her to his office, slamming the door behind her, his voice a storm barely contained. You think you humiliated me yesterday. You think you can humiliate me again in my own barracks. You are done. I will tear apart every clearance, every file, every shadow you hide behind until there's nothing left. You hear me? Nothing. Victoria stood calm, posture perfect, eyes steady. She didn't speak. And that silence, that unbearable, unshakable silence, was the one thing he couldn't fight. Because how do you defeat someone who refuses to give you the battlefield? What happens when silence becomes too loud to ignore? That was the question hanging over Fort Meridian as the week bled into another. Soldiers no longer whispered her name in secret corners. They said it openly, their voices tinged with awe, suspicion, sometimes fear. The tattoo had stripped away the mystery without answering anything. An unanswered question spread faster than truth ever could. By then, command could no longer look the other way. It began with clipped orders over the loudspeaker. Sergeant Major Wells, Lieutenant Colonel, report to command conference. Their faces were carved from stone as they left, but the air buzzed with anticipation, because everyone knew what those meetings were about. By dusk, the rumors hardened into fact. An investigation had been opened. Not just into her, into Foster. The whispers twisted sharper now. Some said Foster was being stripped of command. Others said the entire base was under review. A few claimed the Pentagon itself had sent word. Whatever the truth, one fact cut through it all: the wolf tattoo had summoned ghosts bigger than any of them. Victoria felt the ground shifting beneath her, not with panic, not even with relief, but with inevitability. Because the past she had buried under silence had finally clawed its way to the surface. That night she sat alone in the barracks, journal balanced on her knees. She wrote not of drills or rumors but of memories. The alley in where she first pulled the trigger, the dust-thick stairwell where Daniels had fallen, the rooftop extraction where the comms had gone dead and the world had collapsed into fire and silence. 11 names, 11 ghosts. Her pen pressed harder until the paper nearly tore. Because now the past wasn't just hers to carry. It was being dragged into the light by men who had never lived it. And she hated that more than anything. The following morning she was summoned. Soldier, report to operations briefing room. The words echoed down the corridor like a verdict. Soldiers paused to watch her pass, their eyes full of questions she didn't answer. The room was small, windowless, walls lined with muted gray panels. Wells sat at one end of the table, posture steady but eyes watchful. Sat beside her, tablet in hand, face unreadable. Across from them, Foster paced like a caged wolf, fury barely contained. Kane lingered near the corner, silent but smug, her eyes flicking to Victoria like someone waiting for blood. And in the center of it all, an empty chair. Hers. She sat calm, silent. Wells spoke first, her voice level. Soldier, there are inconsistencies between your record and your demonstrated knowledge. We are here to address them. Do you understand? Victoria nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Leaned forward. You invoked clearance when pressed. We've confirmed that your file contains multiple redactions. Some extend beyond even our level of access. That is unusual. Extremely unusual. Foster cut in, voice sharp. Unusual, it's deception. She's been lying since the day she set foot here. She undermines cohesion, defies orders, and now hides behind clearance she doesn't deserve. Wells shot him a warning glance, but his words had already poisoned the air. Victoria's eyes flicked to him, then back to, calm, controlled. Sir, I have never an order. I have fulfilled every task given. Foster barked a bitter laugh. Fulfilled? You hijacked the training exercise. You broadcasted tactical directives no soldier at your level should even know existed. You humiliated me in front of 300 troops. That's not fulfillment. That's sabotage. The word landed heavy. Sabotage. Didn't react. Wells' gaze hardened. Victoria's breath slowed, each inhale measured. She had been called many things in her life: ghost, survivor, liability. But sabotage was something else. It was an accusation that could burn her to ash if she let it stand. She spoke, voice quiet but firm. If I had stayed silent, the exercise would have failed. Soldiers would have walked into ambushes. Hostages would have been lost. My decision preserved the mission. Foster's face darkened. Your decision? You had no right to make that call. Wells interjected, her voice sharp. Captain, enough. The issue is whether the decision was effective. The issue is where this soldier learned tactics that exceed her record. Silence pressed in. Victoria's hands tightened on her knees beneath the table. Every instinct screamed to stay quiet, to let the storm pass, to protect the grave she had dug over Operation Midnight Falcon. But another instinct, deeper and older, whispered something else. That maybe silence wasn't protection anymore. Maybe it was surrender. She drew a slow breath. My training is classified. My record is redacted because my prior assignment was part of a unit that does not exist on paper. Foster lunged forward, fists slamming the table. Enough of this ghost story. There is no unit, no secret assignment. You think a tattoo makes you untouchable. I'll prove you're a fraud. His voice cracked, raw, desperate. And Wells looked at him then, not at Victoria, but at Foster. And in her eyes was something Victoria had seen before in cities far away, recognition of a man whose fear had his control. Captain, Wells said quietly, leave the room. The silence that followed was seismic. Foster froze, disbelief etched into every line of his face. Excuse me. You are compromised, Wells said, calm, measured, final. Your personal conflict with this soldier has made you unfit for this review. Leave now. The words were a blade. For a man who had clung to control with bleeding hands, they cut deeper than any insult. He opened his mouth, but's quiet tone sealed it. That is an order, Captain. The room seemed to tilt. For the first time since she'd arrived at Fort Meridian, Foster had no ground left. He stood shaking, his fury swallowing him whole. For a heartbeat, Victoria thought he might strike the table or worse, but he didn't. He turned, and the door slammed behind him. Kane followed, her smirk fading into something unsettled. And suddenly the room was smaller, quieter, more dangerous. Set his tablet down, his eyes fixed on Victoria, heavy with unspoken weight. Iron, he said softly. The words weren't a question, they were recognition. Wells' posture didn't shift, but the tension in her shoulders told the truth. She knew too. Victoria didn't answer, didn't need to. Because the silence in that room said more than confirmation ever could. Exhaled slowly. You realize what this means. If your background is what I believe it is, then every soldier on this base is now carrying a risk they don't understand. If word spreads beyond these walls. It already has, Victoria cut in, her voice quiet but steady. The words landed like stone. Wells' eyes narrowed. And what about you? Do you understand the risk? Remaining silent won't protect you anymore. Sooner or later, someone will demand answers you can't refuse. Victoria's gaze lowered for the first time. The weight pressed heavy on her chest, heavier than any pack, heavier than any rifle, because she knew Wells was right. Her silence had protected her for years, but now it was a beacon, drawing every question closer. And the only way forward was through the ghost she had sworn never to name again. That night she wrote again. But this time, not just names. She wrote the story of Operation Midnight Falcon. Not for them, not for command, for herself. She wrote of the desert city's twisting alleys, of the children who had carried messages, of the night the mission shifted from extraction to annihilation. She wrote of the faces of her 11, the ones who didn't come home. She wrote of Daniel's last words cut off mid-sentence by gunfire, and of the silence that followed, the silence she had carried ever since. And as her pen moved, her breath shook. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't enough to hold it all. Her chest ached, her throat burned, and tears she hadn't allowed herself since the day of the mission blurred the ink across the page. She didn't stop writing, not until dawn burned the horizon red. And when she finally closed the journal, her hands trembling, she whispered the words she had never said aloud. I lived, they didn't. The truth, the wound, the reason silence had been her shield. And now it was cracking. What happens when silence can't hold anymore? That was the question stalking Fort Meridian in the final days of the storm. Soldiers had stopped pretending it was business as usual. They drilled, they ate, they slept, but everything they did carried the weight of her shadow. The wolf tattoo had split the base in two, those who feared it and those who drew strength from it. And Foster was drowning. Stripped from the investigation, his name whispered with contempt, his authority shattered. He moved like a man cornered, all fury and no direction. He still barked orders, still carried the posture of command, but even rookies could see through it now. His voice was loud, but it no longer carried. And men who lose power cling to desperation. It was near midnight when it happened. Victoria was returning from the range, journal tucked under her arm, her boots carrying her steady along the empty corridor. The base was hushed, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls, brittle and waiting. She turned the corner, and there he was. Foster, waiting. His eyes were wild, shadowed with exhaustion, his fists clenched like weapons he didn't know how to use. You think you've won, don't you? His voice cracked against the quiet. You think a tattoo makes you untouchable, makes you better than me. Victoria said nothing. She didn't stop moving. She simply walked past. But he blocked her path, chest heaving, spit flecking at the corners of his mouth. You don't belong here. You never did. You came to destroy me, to strip me in front of my own command. Well, I'm not finished. She looked at him then, steady, unshaken. And in her silence, he saw what he feared most. Irrelevance. He snapped. His hands shot forward, shoving her back into the wall. Her journal fell, pages scattering across the floor like torn ghosts. But she didn't fight. She didn't lash out. She simply stood, her breath calm even as his rage poured over her. Because she knew something he didn't. The louder he became, the more the silence swallowed him whole. And then voices. Boots pounding, lights flicking on. Martinez, Wells, 2 MPs behind them. Captain Wells' voice thundered, "Stand down." But Foster didn't move. His fists trembled where they pressed against her shoulders, his voice a broken scream. She's not one of us, she never was. And Victoria, still calm, still steady, finally spoke. I was one of 11. The words froze the air. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, but it carried heavier than his shouting ever could. I was one of 11, Operation Midnight Falcon. They sent us into a city already burning. We were told we'd bring them out, the hostages, the children. We made it to the square. And then... Her eyes closed. For the first time, she let the memory break free. They didn't come home, I did. The silence afterward was cavernous. Wells' face softened, understanding dawning. Martinez swallowed hard, her eyes bright with the kind of ache only soldiers know. Even the MPs shifted, their postures less rigid, as though they, too, felt the ghosts in her words. Though Foster couldn't hear it, he was too far gone. He pulled back his fist, desperate, shaking. But it never landed. The MPs tackled him to the floor. wrenching his arms behind his back as he shouted incoherently, rage and humiliation tearing what was left of him apart. Victoria stepped back, steadying her breath. She looked at her scattered journal pages across the floor, words smeared with ink, names of the dead shining under the harsh fluorescent light. She bent slowly, gathering them one by one, her hands calm even as her chest trembled. When she stood again, Wells was watching her, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with the quiet understanding of one soldier who had seen another's ghosts. "This will be handled," Wells said softly. "Not by him, not by whispers, by the truth." Victoria met her eyes. For the first time she didn't look away. Because the truth was already loose. The following days blurred. Foster was removed from command, escorted out with none of the ceremony he had clung to so desperately. Kane faded into the background, her whispers stripped of power, her coalition dissolved. Phillips avoided her gaze, shame carved into his silence. Tried once to apologize, but Victoria shook her head gently, not in anger, but in mercy. Martinez remained, quiet, watchful, the only one who seemed to understand that what had happened wasn't victory, wasn't vindication. It was survival, the same survival that had marked her back in ink years ago. Command kept its distance, and Wells held their meetings, filed their reports, said words like containment and classification. But they never asked her again. Perhaps they already knew enough. Perhaps they didn't want to know more. And for once she was grateful. Because some truths weren't meant to be owned by anyone else. On her last evening before reassignment, she walked alone to the perimeter fence. The desert stretched endless before her, the sky a canvas of fading orange and deepening blue. She carried her journal. One by one she read the names aloud, 11 of them, each syllable soft, each pause heavy, each memory pulling at the silence around her. And when the last name left her lips, she closed the book. For the first time in years, she didn't feel crushed by the silence that followed. Because now, the silence wasn't just hers to carry. It was shared. Not by everyone, not even by most, but by enough. When the convoy came to take her away, Martinez stood nearby. She didn't ask where Victoria was going, didn't ask what came next. She only said one thing. "You're not broken, you're carrying, that's different." Victoria met her eyes, the faintest curve of something almost like a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Carrying still hurts," she said softly. Martinez nodded. "It means you're still alive." And with that, Victoria climbed into the truck. The engine rumbled, the desert dust rose, and the bass faded behind her. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't fight. It simply survives. It carries the weight. It speaks when silence can no longer hold. And in the end, it acts.